Welcome to Grain Rainbows, the podcast community for people coming out LGBT plus later in life. I'm your host, Dr. Ginger Campbell. Wherever you are on your journey, I hope this podcast will help you feel less alone. Today's episode will be a little different. I'll be talking about Billie Jean King's new autobiography, All In. I did send her several interview requests, but got no response. This was disappointing because although I have interviewed over 200 people since I started podcasting in 2006, Billie Jean King is definitely my dream interview. Before I share my review, I want to remind you that you can find more episodes of Grain Rainbows at grainrainbows.com. You can also subscribe for free or follow in your favorite podcasting app and all other audio apps like Spotify, Pandora, and Amazon Music. You can get show notes automatically via our newsletter. Just follow the link on the website or text Grain Rainbows, all one word, to 33777. Spell grain with an A, Grain Rainbows, all one word, to 33777. You can send me feedback at grainrainbows@gmail.com. So why Billie Jean King? Well, she didn't come out publicly till she was over 50, so her story definitely belongs on Grain Rainbows. On a more personal note, Billie Jean King has been my personal hero since I saw her picture in the paper after she won Wimbledon in 1968. I was 12 years old and just starting to learn to play tennis. The reason she made an impression on me was that she was the first woman athlete I ever saw featured. Most people remember Billie Jean King for beating Bobby Riggs in the famous Battle of the Sexes match played in the fall of 1973. I remember watching that match on TV and cheering her on. As a female athlete, I understood what was at stake. But I've talked to many younger women who either don't know who Billie Jean King is or they don't understand why she is so important, not just as an athlete, but as someone who fought for women's rights. Her role in building women's tennis was a large factor in her not coming out as soon as others like Martina Navratilova. In her new book, All In, Billie Jean King shares this story for the first time, but I think it's important to acknowledge that her contributions would stand even if she never came out publicly. More than half of the book is about tennis, but it's important to put this into context. It's especially important that the story of how women's tennis became what it is today be preserved. Tennis is the only sport where female athletes make the same money as men. However, I know many of you aren't interested in tennis, so I'll just hit the highlights. Billie Jean King was born in 1943, and she began to play tennis in 1954 when she was 10. An important early event was being banned from a group photo in 1955 because she was wearing shorts. This seems crazy today, but it's a reminder of what things were like back then. She describes what it was like to be a female junior tennis player in the late 50s and early 60s. She was allowed to play at the top private clubs, but she didn't get the same perks as the male athletes. One year she won Wimbledon, the most prestigious tournament in the world, and came back to high school to zero press attention. As a college player at Long Beach State, she had no access to scholarship money and could barely make ends meet. She married very young to Larry King, and she was definitely in love. Other possibilities were not even on her radar, which I think is something that many of us can still understand. Another important development that's described in the book is how the Women's Tennis Association, WTA, came into being. Up until 1968, tennis was officially an amateur sport. If a player turned pro, they could no longer compete in the Grand Slam events. Back in the 50s, Jack Kramer started a men's pro tour that siphoned off the best male players, like Pancho Gonzalez and Rod Laver. Things finally came to a head when Wimbledon announced that it would start allowing pros to compete. This is what forced the U.S. National Championships to become the U.S. Open. But it soon became clear that the male athletes didn't want to include female players within the pro ranks. The details of this are in the book, but the bottom line is that Billie Jean King and 8 other players broke away to form what was called the Virginia Slims Tour. Then she became the first female athlete to make $100,000. This was in 1971, when only the very top male athletes made that amount. Eventually, she also helped to form the Women's Tennis Association, which is the organization that runs women's tennis today. Before I talk about the Riggs match, I want to mention one other almost forgotten story, the story of Renee Richards, the transgender woman who played briefly on the women's tour in 1976 and 77. She was banned from the U.S. Open but sued. Billie Jean King describes why she filed an affidavit in Renee's behalf, and Renee won. I remember this too. She was a little taller than most players, but clearly not any stronger, and certainly not as strong as Martina Navratilova was in her prime, or the Williams sisters. For brevity, I've not mentioned the civil rights events of the 1960s, but these form a constant backdrop in the book, including King's grief when President John Kennedy was assassinated on her birthday in 1963. So in early 1973, the women's tour was still very fragile and vulnerable when Bobby Riggs began claiming, quite loudly, that women belonged in the kitchen, not on the tennis court. Title IX had passed in 1972, but was not being implemented. The ERA had also stalled, thanks to Phyllis Schlafly's convincing people that it would lead to unisex bathrooms. Initially, King refused to play Bobby Riggs, but Margaret Court, who was arguably the best player in the world, agreed to play and lost badly. I remember this very vividly. I was mad at her for letting us down. Back then, women commonly let men win. It was considered the right thing to do. This is actually pretty well portrayed in the 2017 movie Battle of the Sexes, starring Emma Stone and Steve Carell. But this meant that Billie Jean King had to play Riggs, and the rest is history. Why did this matter? Obviously, the victory was symbolic, given that he was 55 and she was in her prime. At the time, it felt like everything was at stake. We all knew that if she lost, the small progress that had been made would be undone. One thing many people don't know is that Title IX was not written about sports. It just says that schools that get federal money have to give equal opportunity to both sexes. It was intended to improve access to professions like medicine and the law. I'm not sure of the exact timing, but I think it was a soccer player named Amy Love who sued for the right to play soccer, and that's what led to the application of Title IX to sports. At the time Billie Jean King played Bobby Riggs, she was having an affair with the woman who would become her undoing. In 1981, this woman sued, claiming that Billie Jean King had promised to support her. This was the famous palimony suit, which King won in court, but which destroyed her plans to retire. At the time, she admitted to the affair but denied being gay. Even so, her endorsements dried up and she had to play several more years just to stay afloat financially. Let's consider why she did not come out publicly at that time. She is very hard on herself in the book, even while she explains her fears that this could have destroyed women's tennis. I think it's important to acknowledge that those fears were well-founded. I had my only brief affair with a woman in 1980, so I remember firsthand what things were like in 1981. Virtually no one was out. I was playing competitive softball, and many of my fellow players feared losing their jobs. There was also still a strong stigma against female athletes that assumed that they were gay, even when they weren't. So in the context of Billie Jean King's lifelong commitment to women's tennis, her decision not to come out was really not a choice at all. Her reputation finally recovered from the palimony scandal, partly due to changing attitudes toward gays and lesbians, but she did not come out publicly until she was in her 50s, even though she had already been with Alana Kloss for decades. They came out publicly as a couple in 2006. And in this book, she reveals for the first time that they were married by former Mayor David Dinkins at his apartment in 2018. Dinkins was a huge tennis fan. Billie Jean King is quite candid in this book about her struggles both with understanding and coming to terms with her sexuality and the consequences of not being able to come out sooner. She continued to love Larry King, even though their marriage faltered for reasons that had nothing to do with sex. For a long time, he resisted divorce. She also had the usual concerns about her parents, but they were able to accept and love Alana when they had the chance. Billie Jean King also describes how, despite her external successes, not being able to come out took a heavy toll, which for her manifested as a severe eating disorder. It was entering treatment for this that finally convinced her that she had to come out. As always, her story is inspiring, not because she didn't make mistakes, but because she has never stopped fighting for what she believes is right. All In by Billie Jean King is a compelling book on many levels. I especially enjoyed listening to the audio version because she reads it herself and her emotions really come through. She gives us a firsthand account of the early days of women's professional tennis, the famous Battle of the Sexes, and last but not least, her story of coming out later in life. There are so many questions I would love to ask her if I ever get that dream interview. I'd love to hear from you. You can send me email at grainrainbows@gmail.com. You can also find more episodes of Grain Rainbows at grainrainbows.com. If you want to get show notes automatically, sign up for a free newsletter. Just text Grain Rainbows to 33777. That's grain with an A, Grain Rainbows, all one word, to 33777. There's also a Grain Rainbows fan page on Facebook, and we are at GrainR on Twitter. We have a private Grain Rainbows group on MeWe.com. This group was moved from Facebook due to privacy concerns. Just email me if you want to join. Also, if you're already a member of the MeWe group, please check back in and participate. Next month's episode will be the 3rd anniversary of Grain Rainbows. Until then, I hope you'll check out my other podcasts, Brain Science and Books and Ideas. Grain Rainbows is copyright 2021 to Dr. Virginia Campbell. You may copy it to share it with others, but for any other uses or derivatives, please contact me at grainrainbows@gmail.com.